Hello everybody, welcome to my tutorial on how to build a passenger detecting minecart station. What you see in front of you here is actually going to be an arrival station. It's going to be made up of three components. The first is going to be the incoming rail, or the input, and also the outgoing rail, which is the output. Usually my output rail will be connected to a Pez dispenser, which keeps extra carts for the departing station if they were to send another cart out. Today we're going to focus on just the actual arrival state. And also, of course, you have your piston, which pushes the carts on and off the track. Basically, it's going to go ahead and switch the carts to this outgoing track here. Typically, on a build like this, you'll notice that there's one piston that does all the work and is static. And basically, my build here differs because I do use a second piston. Much like your gates and hidden doors, this is usually pretty tricky to actually set up. However, I'll show you what this thing does, and I'll show you how it's wired, and you'll be amazed at how easily you can get this set up. So first and foremost, you're going to have a cart. If it's an empty cart that you pushed, basically it's going to go immediately to the outgoing rail, and it's going to do so in that fashion with the retraction and the extension of both pistons. And basically, if you're inside of the vehicle, you're not going to go ahead and get pushed right off. It has the pressure plate underneath. Once you do hop off, however, it will go ahead and do the same exact thing with an empty cart. There's two sensors here, one of which is going to be the detector rail, which usually activates the back piston to retract, pulling this guy out of place, and then also this particular pressure plate to detect if you're here. And this pressure plate really acts as a hold button for the signal to keep the back piston retracted. Usually in a setup like this with a piston pushing in and out, they're usually static and they're set above this block which I'm pointing to right now. If I open up the floor here to show you guys the actual setup on the bottom here, if you wanted to hide all your redstone, usually you're going to do one very similar thing. You're going to go ahead and power this block for your minecart station with this redstone torch. And there's really no two ways about it, because if you need to hide everything with it being flat on the ground, this is really the only block you have access to without actually going ahead and exposing any wiring. So typically, if you wanted this piston that doesn't move to do something that you like, you have to manipulate the power in which this redstone torch receives. And because the proximity of the sensors to the actual torch itself, it doesn't really give you much room for play. You're going to have to run either redstone a very long way, go through a few gates, and then come back to the torch, or you basically can't do it unless you put a button or a switch that you have to manually hit. So for a full automated setup, usually the footprint of the actual build is really large. So before I go into explanation, let me just show you an aerial view of what basically this build looks like. It's very small, as you can see. There's only 2 blocks deep on this side here, 3 blocks on this side, and then it runs over to this piston here, and that's as far as it goes. The dig distance is going to be 3 blocks deep, so a very shallow build as well. So to explain how this works, we start down here with these 2 redstone pieces that are situated directly under these 2 detector rails and also the pressure plate. And what you get here is a very kind of unusual setup, because usually you have 2 of these guys here that will run individual wiring into an individual gate input. But right here, they both will actually go ahead and signal for the same signal or the same line, and they send power all the way to the back corner here, which goes into this block, and then it turns this piston off. Now at the idle state, I've chose this setup here, and I also chose to have the piston extended for a very good particular reason. One of which, the wiring really just saves me a lot of room. I don't have to invert it an extra time before having to go straight up, and this is really the easiest way to send signals straight up, so that's a plus. Secondly, when you have a sticky pistons tend to, if you work them fast enough, detach whatever's in front of it. And having this position where there's a gap in the middle, no matter if this comes back retrieved from the actual idle state or not, with the piston attached, it doesn't matter, because this is always going to be here regardless if it's attached or not, and this is always going to be here. So the speed really doesn't play a factor into this build, so that's another advantage of having it on the on state for the idle. And in the front piston, basically you have the front piston settling in the front here. The advantage to that is basically that is where you want the pushing to happen, and you can literally only pull and push a piston if it's in the off state. So I have to put it on the off state to go ahead and allow the cart to go through, and on top of that it has to be on the off state for it to retract, so I could go ahead and put this on an on state during the idle time. Sounds kind of crazy, but I mean basically everything here is set up for a reason. So getting back to the subject at hand, the redstones will get powered. It's going to go ahead and turn off this block, turn off this torch, which basically will turn off this block, turning off this piston. And then at the same time, these guys here are also going to power this row of repeaters. And the repeaters are also done out of necessity because there would be a loop if I did redstone. There will be a loop here if I did redstone, and there will be a loop here if I did redstone. And out of pure luck, the repeaters gave me just enough delay, even on a 0 delay, to hold enough power where they will go ahead and deactivate this torch if powered, deactivate these redstones, which will power this block and this redstone torch, powering this block above it, and powering the actual piston. Now, with the timing of everything here though, that's basically put there right now to simulate the pressing of any rails or pressure plates. So now the power is applied, so now we're in the, I would say, phase 2 of 3. And phase 2 is where everything is retracted. You have power to this block here. Typically this is where most people end up doing with a static system, and they just give up because now you have a fully extended arm. The minecart cannot get to the actual platform for it to get pushed off because the arm extended past it will hold the carts before the pushing location. And the reason why this is working for me now is obviously because the piston is not sitting on top anymore. So instead of manipulating the actual power going to this bottom block, I'm powering this regardless, and I'm just holding this block in idle. There's no power in this particular square until I want to push it back out. So I could literally sit in my cart for as long as I want without it actually going, pushing me off, or I could have it come back as fast as I want without much delay, because once I hit it, it's instantaneous, because this particular portion here, there's no delay. And once you get no delay there, this comes back out, and as soon as that goes, there's only a 0.3 second delay. There's a native 0.1 even at the 0 setting for repeaters to actually go ahead and unpower or power this torch. So this particular setup here is done with real good speed in mind, and also it's done with a very controllable state. With everything said and done, if we come back out to look at the top, the build itself is really small. All the redstone could be hidden, and everything that I'm covering up now in planks is basically the only space that you need to dig out. And like I said, majority of the actual build is done with a 3 deep cavern. And if you wanted to, you can actually start it with 3 deep and just place the blocks later, or you could start with a 2 deep and just dig what you need out. With this particular setup, it's pretty easy to build. I mean, if you actually follow the redstone wiring, and I'm going to go ahead and show you guys up top with it open. It's pretty easy to build. I mean, you got underneath these two guys, you got redstone that needs to basically sit in between. So, I mean, out of necessity, they're a block higher. You have to dig down here, basically, because you have redstone that sit on top of a block, and to activate those, they need to be a block deeper. You have these 3 repeaters that are out of necessity. You just make a U-turn with that, and then it goes underneath the block which powers the piston, and you're basically done. It saves a lot on actual building material, build time, and if you are like me, you like to elevate your rails and elevate your stations, this is a really good way to build a structure without having to spend a lot of time covering up all the redstone wiring. Underground, I mean, in creative mode, I could build this basically in about a minute. So this is a pretty simple, quick setup. If you like it, I mean, comment it. If you have questions, comment it, anything. Thanks for watching, and hopefully this helps. Bye-bye.